All right, we're going to start a nonfiction text called Mummies and Pyramids. On page 13 begins chapter 1, Ancient Egypt. For thousands of years, mummies and pyramids were a great mystery. How were the pyramids built? Why did people make mummies? What was the strange writing on mummy cases? In the last 200 years, scientists have learned a great deal about the people who built the pyramids and made mummies. They were hardworking people who enjoyed life. They loved science and music. They believed in a sun god and a cat goddess. They thought they could live forever. They were the people of ancient Egypt. Egypt is where one of the oldest civilizations in the world began. 5,000 years ago, Egyptians invented one of the first forms of writing. They made a kind of paper from reed plants. They invented a calendar, much like the ones we use today. The ancient Egyptians built some of the most amazing buildings in the world. Or, excuse me, the ancient Egyptians built some of the most amazing buildings the world has ever known. Their painters and sculptors created beautiful works of art. Their doctors went to school to study how the body works. Why did such a great civilization begin in Egypt so long ago? Now, the sidebar on page 14 has two vocabulary words. It says, a person who studies ancient Egypt is called an Egyptologist. And the second, a civilization is a group of people with an advanced way of life that includes science, art, and most often writing. Page 15. Most historians think the answer is simple: the Nile River. The Nile River is the longest river in the world. It flows through the middle of Egypt. Now, the map says the Nile River flows into the Mediterranean Sea. You see the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, Egypt with an arrow, and it's all in Africa. And then there's the Nile River. And the boy is saying Egypt is located in northeast Africa. Page 16. The Nile gave the ancient Egyptians water for drinking and bathing. Egyptian fishermen caught many kinds of fish in the Nile. Hunters hunted wild birds along its banks. Boats sailed up and down the Nile, carrying people and goods. But the Nile's greatest gift to the Egyptians wasn't fish or birds or drinking water or travel. It was mud. Flood, floods, and farming. Most of the land in Egypt is part of the Sahara Desert. Desert soil is sandy and rocky. It is not good for farming. To the left of that, you see our vocabulary word. The Sahara is the biggest desert in the world. The ancient Egyptians called the desert the Red Land. No one lived in the Red Land. Hardly anything could grow there. The land along the banks of the Nile was very different from the Red Land. The soil there was dark and soft. The Egyptian called this land the Black Land. The Black Land was some of the best farmland in the world. Why was the Black Land so good for farming? Well, every July, the Nile River flooded its banks. The floodwater dumped a layer of black mud along each side of the river. The black mud was very fertile. That means it was full of the things that plants need to grow. In November, the floodwaters went down. Farmers plowed the black land. They planted seeds in the rich, fertile soil. In March, they harvested their crops. The harvest was almost always very plentiful. That means there was more than enough food for everyone. On page 19 to the right, the vocabulary word, it says to harvest means to gather and store the crops you've grown. Page 20 is a diagram, shows the flooding of the Nile, the planting, harvesting, and then it continues in a cycle. Then it floods. Once the flood stops, they plant in the rich soil, they harvest all the crops, and so on. Page 21. Farm year, July, flooding, November, planting, March, harvesting. Two kingdoms. Villages formed near the good farmland along the Nile. Some of the villages became cities. Over time, the villages and cities became part of two separate kingdoms. For many years, each kingdom had a different king. One king ruled over the land in the north, where the Nile flows into the sea. The other king ruled over the land in the south, along the Nile Valley. About 5,000 years ago, a king named Menes, united the two kingdoms. The vocabulary word to the right says to unite means to join together. Page 22. King Menes built a capital city close to where the separate kingdoms had met. He wore a special crown. It was made from the crowns of both kingdoms. Most historians say the joining of the two kingdoms was the beginning of the great Egyptian nation. When King Menes put on his double crown, he started a civilization that lasted for 3,000 years. Turn the page to learn about the ancient Egyptian alphabet. This way. Hieroglyphic writing. The ancient Egyptians wrote with pictures. Their picture writing is called hieroglyphic writing. The pictures were mostly of things from everyday life: owl, water, basket. But the pictures did not always stand for the thing they showed. See, the little duck is equals sun. Most Egyptians never learned to read hieroglyphs. There were over 700 different signs. And that concludes chapter 1. Make sure you complete the work in your packet.